The Best Mummy Movies and Why There Aren't More. Written and read by Dean Delp. Between two popular choices, there always seems to be a forgotten third. After all, when's the last time anyone told you their favorite flavor of ice cream was strawberry? Between the vanilla of Dracula and the chocolate of Frankenstein, we find our strawberry stand-in, The Mummy. So here are the best mummy movies and why there aren't more. The problem. First, though there are many movies featuring the mummy as a monster, the designs for them are almost completely identical, and the non-standard ones are often worse. Second, since the character is almost totally covered in bandages, reading emotion from facial expressions is nearly impossible. Another issue is that the source material used for mummy movies is much looser than Dracula, Frankenstein, or any Stephen King film. While that can sometimes allow for greater flexibility, the lack of a pre-existing structure can also lead to less than stellar decisions. Other than genuine Egyptian history and mythology, the only suitable source material is Bram Stoker's The Jewel of the Seven Stars, which served as an inspiration for the few good mummy movies that do exist. Lastly, the sad reality is that the average quality of a mummy movie is simply lower than most other horror flicks. Often plagued by awful CGI and terrible action cliches, mummy movies such as the 1999 Brendan Fraser version, you're wrong if you think it's good, and the positively putrescent 2017 Tom Cruise film speak for themselves. Nevertheless, there are two mummy movies that are truly excellent. Masterpieces, really. The original. The first of the two excellent mummy movies is the original, The Mummy, 1932. Based closely on Jewel of the Seven Stars, it is a shadowy slow burn featuring the inimitable Boris Karloff. It also stars the lovely Zita Johann as the leading lady and boasts some truly beautiful and stylish sets. One thing that really sets this movie apart from others of the same period is the amount of violence it was willing to show. The film came out 2 years before the infamous Hays Code and thus wasn't subject to the same restrictions as later mummy movies. Notably, there is a scene in which a group of slaves are impaled through the chest by spears. The clip is short but very graphic by the standards of the day, and certainly during the standards of the code. Zita Johann also shows a shocking amount of skin for 1932. But let's talk about what we're really here for, the mummy itself. The thing that arguably makes Boris Karloff the most interesting mummy is that he isn't wrapped in bandages at all. While he starts that way during the first 10 minutes of the film, he rapidly ditches the toilet paper suit for robes, which display both a modern sensibility and an ancient flair. Boris Karloff's mummy feels not just undead, but fully immortal, like a Dracula without the snide charisma. Karloff brings an air of agelessness and stoicism to the character that is truly unique and lends him a strangely captivating aura. When Karloff's mummy is attempting to ensorcel Zita Johann, it feels legitimately hypnotic. Karloff's mummy isn't a mindless zombie in gauze. He's a cursed undead wizard, bent on ensuring his immortality, alongside the reincarnated love of his life. For a mummy, that's serious panache. It's interesting to think how anyone going back to this movie after seeing other mummy films would likely find Karloff radically different from the, quote, norm, despite the fact that he is the original. But just because something is the original doesn't mean it can't be topped. Hammer time. Let it be known, I'm a huge fan of Terence Fisher and the early Hammer horror films. Often the perfect balance of tension, aesthetics, violence, and skill, a good Hammer flick is a thing of unvarnished beauty. Thankfully, their 1959 version of The Mummy is one such film. Taking the best part of the 1932 film, which is Karloff's performance, the film breaks the character of the mummy into two separate roles. While definitely risky, it turned out to be a brilliant move. By creating two separate characters and making them a dynamic duo, it lets each focus on what they do best and go all out. Christopher Lee as the Mummy is great, even with only his eyes to go on. We can see the dramatic intensity in Lee's performance. The Mummy here is like an unstoppable force, nearly immune to damage and exceedingly strong. He's quick, too. Lee's rendition is exactly what you picture when you hear The Mummy, but done with a flair and passion lesser actors couldn't touch. On the other hand, George Pastel is perfect for his role as the occultist who summons and controls the Mummy. If nothing else, he has the look. Between Pastel and Lee, they make a pair that knocks it out of the park in terms of style, class, and menace. As a side note, Peter Cushing makes a much better protagonist than the one from the 1932 version, though Yvonne Furneaux has nothing on Zita Johann. The solution. The way I see it, the classic Mummy story has all the ingredients for excellent horror and desperately needs a good resurrection. Granted, each reboot seems to be worse than the last, but this need not be so. First, a return to the source material would be helpful. The Jewel of the Seven Stars is by no means a great book. In fact, it did pretty poorly when it was published, but the mechanics of the story are still solid. I am in no way suggesting a straight adaptation, but the movies that have attempted to capture the feel of the novel have always been best. Second, any new Mummy movie should take a page out of Hammer's book and make the Mummy a destructive tool of the real villain. What all the modern Mummy movies lack is depth, and splitting the character is a way to get some of it back. Although it should be noted that some of the modern films have tried this, but have done it with characters that really haven't had any depth themselves, and weren't any more complicated than the Mummy they were raising. Third, lean back into horror instead of supernatural action. Since The Mummy 1999, all subsequent adaptations have been action movies. Really bad action movies. The basic Mummy story is ill-suited to a standard action film, but perfect for horror. Last, go heavy on the occultism and eldritch lore. While many of the modern films try to capture this, they ultimately fail for the same reasons. Among those reasons is that CGI is not magic. Anyone wanting to see what I mean need only watch the scene from the 1932 version where Karloff peers into a divination pool to scry on the location of his beloved and uses incantations to place curses on his enemies. All of that is done, of course, without CGI, and it not only looks great, but feels far more menacing. In the end, while The Mummy has often had the short end of the stick, this needn't be the case. Despite the fact that the plot is based on a kind of shaky source, The Mummy still has all the prerequisites of an excellent horror film. Who knows? We may never get a great Mummy movie again. But maybe we will. It might just take the right director. Perhaps with a little real magic, the Mummy movie could, much like its titular villain, rise to life again. Hello again. This is Dean Delp. If you enjoyed my perspective here, or even just my voice, then please consider checking out my podcast on a completely different subject. I'm the host of Modernist Monastery, a bi-weekly 15 to 20-minute show about the connection between ancient philosophical and spiritual practices and modern scientific research. More importantly, it's a show about how to apply that connection to improving your everyday life. If you're interested in checking it out, then please follow the link in the comments or the description below.